Your hosts, Cecil, Lammey, Andrew Mason here. Mace, you are in Arizona for the NFL owners meetings. Before we run down our list of topics of the day, what's the vibe like? I saw you were doing a microphone count earlier today at the Sean Payton table, and it seemed like Payton was kind of the cat's meow, cat's pajamas or cat's meow. I never can remember which one it is.
I thought it was bee's knees and cat's meow. Where does cat's pajamas come from?
I
I
don't know, but
mean,
either way, Sean Payton was wearing them, or is them, or something. I don't know. Sean Payton seemed like the talk of Arizona.
well, he's wearing the pants in that organization, no doubt about it.
Sure, yeah, no,
Yeah,
no
it's
doubt
his.
there.
It is
And
his show, and he was basically like he was kind of the star of the show. Like if you on one side of the Broncos table, you had D'Amico Ryans at Houston, and it was a while before any camera showed up for him. On the other side, it was you had Andy Reid of the Chiefs, and I think not there was maybe one or two cameras for him at the most, where we had like several cameras. You saw about in the end about a dozen or so mics, you know every seat at the table taken, reporters standing beyond that. It was he was kind of the star today. Although I didn't get a chance to see across the room because there's a lot of attention, like always, for Bill Belichick because he doesn't
right,
talk very often. So, and I guess Bill was in his usual salty mood today.
yeah, that sounds about right. It sounds about right for George Payton to maybe backtrack on his statements about Javonte Williams. Let's get your opinion on that, Mace. It's one thing that at the combine, when George Payton was like, week one, and he expressed confidence that Javonte Williams would be ready in week one of the regular season. I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. There's so many ways he could have answered that without even mentioning week one. We've got the article up now at denversports.com. It seems like George Payton has kind of gone back on those statements a little bit. What's your take here?
Yeah, definitely less optimistic, more realistic. I mean, I don't mean to say backtracking because I don't think anything changed. I think between last month and this month, I just think that kind of clarify. He just kind of clarified it a bit, and maybe he didn't mean to say or use the words that he used when he was asked about Javonte Williams at the combine, and I think framed it in much more realistic terms. Rather than shooting for week one, I think week one is a goal. I think it's a noble goal, but I don't know if it's necessarily a realistic goal for Javonte Williams. We've talked about the reasons why. It's the nature of the injury, multiple ligaments. You're looking at with multiple ligaments. Sometimes there's some residual damage that has to be cleaned up. It's something where you talk about it goes from about an 8 or 9 month rehab to something that's a year or maybe even more than that. And so between that, talking about both Peyton's talking extensively about Samaje Perine and how he could fill in and the versatility of his skill set. It seems like they're prepared for life with Samaje Perine. And Sean Payton, by the way, asked about Latavius Murray. Didn't really have very much to say about Latavius Murray. And that's another thing. Some of Sean Payton's answers are really short. Like he
Yes.
was asked about Murray, and his response was, "quote We'll see," unquote. Then he was asked about if he'd gotten a chance to get out in the Denver area. It's like, not yet. That's it. Like it's just it's really interesting. Like Greg Dulcich, she was asked about him. "Quote, we'll see. We haven't gone through every player relative to the evaluation process. Some of it was hard, the evaluation. Some of it was hard," unquote. I mean, so I heard that response and I thought, see, so you and I have talked about tight ends being good value in this year's draft as you get into round 3.
Yes.
So, yeah, it did not sound like somebody who's enthusiastic about Greg Dulcich, and the reason why is because when you hear him talk about Jarrett Stidham, there's enthusiasm about Stidham's skill set and his possibilities, right? We didn't hear that about Greg Dulcich, for example.
Right. The conversation will continue. We'll get to the Jarrett Stidham comments here coming up a little bit later on in this program. Orange and Blue today, Cecil, Lammey, Andrew Mason. And the Javonte Williams thing, I think they should have full confidence in Samaje Perine. And whether he has to start for a month or 2 months, whatever that number is, I feel completely confident in his ability. He's more than a third down back. They will have another back that he will, share some touches with. So it's not totally the Samaje Perine show, Mace, but if it has to be, I have confidence that he'll produce the way we'd expect him to.
See, I will have more confidence if they go get somebody in the draft that has some explosiveness to them. I'm not as sold on Samaje Perine as you are. I think he's just okay, and I think he can get you by, but he's not a running back that any opponent's really going to have to account for and focus upon in their game planning. Now, if you use a third-round pick on Tyjae Spears to be the guy that you're complimenting with Samaje Perine, then I'm getting excited. Right now, I know you're a big Samaje Perine fan.
Love big backs, and I cannot lie.
Yeah, I'm not as sold on him being a dynamic back because the last couple of years he really hasn't been all that dynamic.
What about Deuce Vaughn? We haven't really talked about him. Spears is probably going to be gone just from the intel that we pick up on at this time of year. Now, it is almost April, which is the month of liars, but it just seems like Spears, by the time the Broncos pick, could be gone because he's one of those kind of risers, and everyone's got more eyes on him. It's kind of like Blake Freeland, who I wrote up in Mile High Monday for DenverSports.com. It's like, okay, that BYU offensive tackle, based on his combine performance and his pro day, which was last week, now he's out of range for the Broncos, in my opinion, cementing himself as a top 50 pick. I think Spears might also be gone. So that brings up Deuce Vaughn from Kansas State. I know a lot of Wildcats fans would be excited about that.
A lot of Wildcats fans be excited about that, but you're with Deuce Vaughn, you're talking, what, fifth round best case scenario for him, maybe even the sixth. I mean, he's strictly a day 3 guy. And it's, you worry about how well he can hold up. Now, 179 on a 5'5" frame, that's actually fine in terms of how the weight is distributed, but is he too small to be a running back in the NFL? I mean, I'll say this: from the hand size is fine, 9.5 inches. That's above the threshold. You're fine with that. And it's not like he's 5'5", 160. He's 5'5", 179. So you're talking about something. You're talking about somebody who does have a little bit of stoutness to him, but he's definitely, to me, more of a gadget back, and so that can help you in the short term. But I don't know if we're talking about him being eventually a part of a 50-50 split. He seems more like a guy that you're getting the ball to a handful of times a game.
Yeah, he would be a rotational type of back. And with Perine and whoever else in this Broncos backfield, and you're down at the owners' meetings, and Sean Payton certainly kind of caused Twitter to go ablaze or whatever when he talked about he's not trading Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. We're in the business of assembling talent, I believe, or gathering talent is what Sean Payton said. I believe he said that to Tom Pelissero. Mace, you're there. How much do you buy into that? He says they're not trading him. I say no one's given him the right price yet.
Well, I think it's interesting to note some of the other things that were said about receivers. And, here's an interesting thing that comes in. I think more of the receiver depth than Sean Payton does. Ryan Payton. I think more of the receiver depth than Sean Payton does in this draft. And this is what Sean Payton said. Quote, "I'm sure as we get close to the draft, if you really look at the draft and you look at the receiver draft depth in the draft, it's not a real deep draft. If you're a team that's looking for receivers, we're not the only team that people called." And then he mentioned Brandon Cooks, for example,
right,
and how it's pretty common. But hearing that, I think what he's saying is, look, this draft class isn't great. Teams are going to dive deeper into it as they formulate their boards over the next 2 or 3 weeks here as the draft approaches. And I feel like the door is ajar a bit for teams as they set their board to realize, okay, in his opinion, maybe we really can't get the wide receiver that we want, and maybe the Broncos and a trade represents a better option. I think there was some beneath the surface jockeying going on in terms of in saying, look, we are kind of still open for business here because this draft class isn't, in my opinion, deep at wide receiver.
Yeah, even when he doesn't say much, there are some things that he does say beneath the surface, read between the lines, whatever you have to, with Sean Payton. And talking about this wide receiver draft class, there should be teams interested. And their phone's been ringing, and if you're a general manager, you're going to pick up that phone. You're going to answer that phone call. Now someone needs to step up to their asking price. I believe it was The Athletic, correct me if I'm wrong, Mace, but they said the Broncos' asking price has been too high. Well, the market hasn't caught up yet, because once everyone gets done and the final dots are I's are dotted and the T's are crossed on the draft board, you're going to look at this wide receiver class and think, maybe we should offer the Broncos more.
Look, deadline spur action, right? And you and I have talked about how if there's a deal that happens, it's more likely to happen as you get toward the draft anyway, or possibly even in the draft. Because, and this is where I think it comes into play for both Sutton and Jeudy, maybe more Sutton than Jeudy, because his draft price tag realistically may be best case scenario round 3, but more like a day 3 pick. You get a team that's gotten through the draft, they've gotten through a round or two, and they haven't gotten a wide receiver, and they need somebody, and that's where all of a sudden the Broncos could be open for business to make a move. And look, I mean, you've got a general manager in George Paton right now who you can tell is clearly struggling a little bit with the lack of draft capital. He talked at midday today about how the Broncos are more inclined to trade back than trade up because they only have 5 draft picks. I think he'd prefer to be in a position where they were able to do both. We know that he likes to wheel and deal. Just look at day 2 of the 2021 draft when they moved up to take Javonte Williams, and then they turned 1 third-round pick into 2 third-round picks and got Baron Browning and Quinn Miners. That's the type of thing that George Paton likes to do, and his hands are kind of tied right now. But, again, these things, they often tend to happen as you get into not only closer to the draft, but even into the draft. So I'd say, even though they didn't use the words for now, right now, I kind of got that. You kind of get that sense that everything is very much kind of temporary and fluid, based on how things end up breaking in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about it and any sort of potential trade of Jerry Jeudy. We got Brad D here in the chat room talking about how they haven't utilized Jeudy correctly. And one thing I would say, Mace, just have a plan. We could talk about the 5th-year option for Jerry Jeudy, all those sorts of things. But if you go in, let's say you don't trade Sutton, which you're not getting much for him anyway, you don't trade Jerry Jeudy, my only advice, or I guess hope for the Denver Broncos, would be that you have a plan for Jeudy, that it does include him being very heavily involved, keep him dialed in, whatever works. That's what I'm all about. So, yeah, I'm not a fan of trading Jerry Jeudy away. Depends on what you get back. If we're talking first rounder, that becomes different. But if he does stay here, they must have a better plan for him.
Well, we got an indication what that plan might be if he's back, because Sean Payton, I have to specify which Payton.
Right.
Sean Payton did mention that in terms of how they use the receivers, one's not going to be locked in at the X, one's not going to be locked in at the Z. They're going to learn multiple positions and move around, which means that you are going to set Jerry Jeudy up to be by himself and set him up in the position that he was in for the most of the last 6 games of last year when he finally got those results and looked like the guy who was a first-round pick back in 2020. So that was interesting as well, that we're not going to see this situation last year where you just lock Cortland Sutton in at one spot, lock Jerry Jeudy in another, and then you find out as you get toward the end of the season that you miscast Jerry Jeudy. No, everybody's going to be cross-trained. Everybody's going to move around, which I think certainly helps Judy's chances.
Well, and I think that also keeps your wide receiver stimulated, right? Because they're not going to check out of a play because at any moment you could be that guy. So wherever you're at in the picking order, wherever you're at on the field, keep them focused, keep them dialed in, and also the return of Tim Patrick. One thing you and I have highlighted is he might be the number one. You could make the argument like, is he truly a number one in the NFL, or is he more of a nice number two when he's healthy? Whatever, we can have that argument. We can have that discussion, Mace. But one thing we have to know for sure is that, well, Tim Patrick coming back, and he's going to come back with a vengeance.
Yeah. That being said, I think you've got two guys who are number twos in Patrick and Sutton. This is not a knock on Tim Patrick. This is just kind of, when you're kind of defining his role. The one who has wide receiver one capability is Jerry Jeudy. I think that's clear when you watch him. It's not that Tim Patrick isn't useful and a good player. He is, but he projects more as that second option, and that's fine. That's fair. And frankly, it's why if you're talking about a deal in terms of what you have in that room, it's probably still more logical to deal Courtland Sutton based on the composition of the room. But the reason why you would not deal Courtland Sutton is because you're selling low, and generally you don't want to sell low.
Right. And George Paton, you mentioned today, he seemed kind of sad that they don't have more picks.
He did. He really did. He really kind of...
It's like Duel of the Fates. What's our Star Wars reference here? Like, we have kind of opposite approaches to the way they want to run the draft. Sean Payton, George Paton. But we know who's really in charge. It's the Sean of the Paytons.
It has been really interesting hearing George Paton at the last couple of press conferences because he had one at the Combine and he had one here, not a big one. It was just Denver media off to the side today around lunchtime. And you got to wonder what's going through his mind, as he's going through this offseason and going through this process because I think yesterday when Sean Payton was asked about the trade rumors and all that, and he just kind of basically said, hey, it's George's job to pick up the phone when it rings. And then, and when teams are calling about Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton, and I thought, I don't think Sean Payton meant it in a bad way, but it just... Yeah, it's different. It's different. That being said, both of them say they're getting along well. They are in draft meetings every day now. Sean Payton did or is it George Paton that mentioned that they are, they're on to the draft now from free agency. They are they're deep into their draft prep. They're as he said, in the dark room every day. A couple of scouts. Payton and the two Paytons watching film. It seems like they get along, but when you are a general manager in a Sean Payton administration, you are number two. You're not number one.
Yeah.
And George Paton came here thinking he was going to be number one. Now, that being said, he's getting paid well to be that number two, basically. But it's pretty clear who's in charge. No matter what is kind of said on the record, it's pretty clear, who's got the big swing and what over there.
Yeah,
right now.
And it certainly is Sean Payton. We heard Sean Payton talk about George Payton's work ethic, right? When they were talking about the draft, and Sean Payton commented on George Payton, too many Paytons, on George Payton's work ethic. And I was like, well, George Payton's never been lazy. Like, he had that reputation at Minnesota. Like, he's a grinder. He's crazy about this stuff, which is good. It's a good problem to have. It's a good situation for the Denver Broncos. My whole argument, I think George Payton is backing it up this offseason, Mace. Just let him do that. Let him do that work. That's his specialty. Hunting for a head coach, not a specialty. Doing this trade for Russell Wilson, not a specialty, but scouting players, finding talent. Can they rewind to that first George Paton draft where he did hit on those picks almost across the board?
Do you think then it was interesting, Cecil, that George Paton specifically mentioned that he didn't go to any pro days, that he focused on it's draft meetings?
Yeah.
that he didn't go making the pro day tour that he has most of the last couple of years. I thought that was interesting, because the reason why you do that with the head coach is you're trying to get the head coach up to speed, to show Sean Payton what he doesn't know, because he hasn't had a chance to dive into these prospects the way that George Payton has. If he were out there on the pro day circuit, it'd be more about gathering information. I feel like by not going to pro days, he's kind of trying to, I hate to say like educating Sean Payton, but you know what I'm saying, right? Kind of,
Right.
yeah, giving him all the information so he can make the decision, because realistically, Sean Payton's going to be the period that ends all sentences, and that's going to include what happens in the draft and who the Broncos pick.
Yeah, you don't want to say educating Sean Payton, and I agree with you. What about cozying up to Sean Payton? Like in any working relationship, like the more time you can spend around each other, the more biorhythms. Let's get real crunchy here, Mace. We're talking about biorhythms for Sean Payton and George Payton. Is there a cozying up factor into the reason why George Payton not attending these pro days?
Maybe trying to build him up, Buttercup.
Are you going to make us sing? Seriously,
No,
on Monday?
no.
Okay.
But you're talking about cozying up, and I just think of like building up Buttercup, but not to let him down, Although, if Sean Payton ultimately decides he'd rather have Ryan Pace as an executive at some point, that would be a letdown, right?
That would be.
Man,
Yeah.
but no indication that's in the offing though, right now.
Okay.
It's the Payton and Payton show.
Payton and Payton with the Denver Broncos. Now, the owners' meetings are going on. You're down there in Arizona. Let's talk about the Jarrett Stidham conversation, which was very big, and Sean Payton seeing something in Stidham that maybe other people haven't seen.
He sees a potential starting quarterback, which you hear that and you think, whoa. That when he said that, one of the first things that went through my mind, admittedly, was, wow, that's going to be a line that launches a lot of conversation over the next weeks and months, right? And if Russell Wilson struggles and there's somebody in reserve that the head coach sees as a potential starter, it's hard not to put those pieces together, right? That he could turn to Jarrett Stidham if Wilson falters. And, I mean, look, we knew based on what they did and what in terms of what they paid Jarrett Stidham, we knew they liked him. We knew they saw something in him. But hearing it again and hearing Sean Payton kind of reiterate that, that was something today. That was kind of a thunderbolt. I wrote about that this morning at denversports.com. But that's an interesting dynamic. I think it's healthy that you have someone that you believe can be a starting quarterback. Personally, I'm not as sold on Jarrett Stidham as Sean Payton is, but Sean Payton knows quarterbacks, right?
Right.
He knows what he's looking at. And he sees something in Jarrett Stidham that he wants to explore and get more out of. He did mention that he likes Stidham coming out of Auburn. So, look, we often talk about this, what the evaluation is in the draft process. That ends up echoing from time to time. George Payton said he liked Jarrett Stidham coming out as well, although I imagine that it was Sean Payton that had a lot more to do with Jarrett Stidham becoming a Bronco than George Payton did. That's, that they were echoing each other, but I think we know like whose opinion what mattered most. And again, it's a very interesting thing because you're kind of reading between the lines of what is said. Not effusive when given the opportunity to be about Greg Dulcich, but effusive when given the opportunity to be about Jarrett Stidham. So, what does it all mean?
And what does it mean? It means he's excited, and that's not a bad thing. And it means that he sees something to run his system that Jarrett Stidham can do. And we're only left to see what the future holds.
Well, he did specifically mention what Jarrett Stidham did at the line of scrimmage and what he does pre-snap. And he cited that from the San Francisco game in particular. Although, again, I think it's really funny how every time Jarrett Stidham gets talked about, it's like, oh, he did well against San Francisco. Nobody, not even Sean Payton, seems to want to mention what happened the next week when they went against the Chiefs.
When the Chiefs had a week worth of film on him.
Yes. So, this is why I'm a raging skeptic. People don't like raging skeptics, I've learned.
They'll be all right. I'd rather just tell the truth. That's the reason why we do this show. We're not going to have the hot takes. We're not going to be the rah-rah boys, right? Where's our pom-poms at? I'm going to look like I posed for my senior photo, right? Which I'll do this. I'll screen cap this, Mace, because the chat room's like, it looks like you're posing for a picture on your work badge or something, or my senior photo. I'll clip this, right? Mm-hmm. And then I'll clip my real senior photo where I have a mullet and a cowboy hat. And you decide. Well,
you guys, it looks like the hair is kind of cascading down the back there.
A little bit, yeah. Now in studio, I guess I could wear my beanie still, but I wanted to look nice today.
Yeah, see, I got my hair cut yesterday, so it's kind of. But I got a little hat head going on as well.
It's hot down there in Arizona.
The cheap Super Bowl hat. Well, it's not. It's a new era cap.
Yeah,
but
did you
I
see
say
those
it's
draft
cheap.
hats today? You tweeted about that. I saw this morning.
Yes,
the draft hats,
you know what?
Very simple.
Yes,
and I know they don't have a pick till the third round, but like those draft hats are actually pretty cool.
That's the first draft hat in the past few years that I consider buying. I think the last draft hat I would have considered buying was the city flag one, but very specifically, city or state flag, but very specifically. The one that I liked best was the Carolina Panthers one because you had elements of like the North Carolina state flag and the South Carolina state flag, and I kind of like that. But this is, they did well. And look, they went with the KISS model. Keep it simple, stupid. No goofy fonts where, one letter doesn't look like the others and all of that, just... They said clean, classic. It's the kind of look that you would be liable to see in the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s. Sometimes you just have to put some chicken noodle soup out of the can, put it on the stovetop, and that's your dinner. You just got to keep it simple. That's what the NFL did today. That's fine. That's fine. I don't have any critiques of this. It's not a wow design, but it's solid. It's clean. I'm okay with it.
Solid and clean, just like orange and blue today, every day, 3:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. Mace, with like about a minute to go. Any final thoughts? Checking in with you today at Arizona.
It's. The thing that comes up, and this is outside of press conferences, but just talking to people who know about Sean Payton and seeing him in action, you get these indications that it's a completely different world, a completely different vibe. You hope for the Broncos it means more wins, but there are things that are ancillary to football itself that are going to look and feel a bit different over the course of the next few months. Like, for example, don't think you're going to be hearing much from players because you're not going to have player press conferences on as regular a basis throughout the offseason. This is going to be a team that operates much more in stealth than it has. If the Broncos win games in the end, that's all that really matters. If they win and they do it in a clean and classy way, hopefully. But there are certain aspects to the rhythm of the year for this team that are going to look and feel a lot different, both internally and externally with some of the stuff we in the media deal with. And it's gonna be a pretty thorough and robust adjustment for everybody.
He is Andrew Mason. You follow him on Twitter at Mace Denver. I am at Cecil Lammey. We both compose for our Owen Mills photography for our senior photos. Orange and blue
Yeah, I
today,
feel like
right
gotta
here.
look off in the distance. I'm actually looking off at, the conspiracy theorists would say that there are chemtrails in the air right now from the
Right.
airplanes, and we're actually where I'm staying is right near the flight path, so I keep seeing planes come by and land. So I could have just looked up and seen planes flying into Sky Harbor Airport. By the way, what a cool name for an airport, Sky Harbor.
Sky Harbor. Sometimes clouds are shaped just like clouds, Mace. Don't let your imagination
Oh,
run
I
wild.
agree. Like, even though Freud never actually said this, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
That's right.
So
And
there
with
you
that
go.
sage-like wisdom, we will wrap up today's program. Be safe, be kind, know that you're appreciated. Stay tuned, and as always, please stay frosty.